Last week, and now Media Freedom Week is being marked with 4 events over 4 days in South Africa. Today, the role of children was discussed. Tomorrow, there will be a talk at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre called Media Credibility and Trust. Are we post-truth or post-journalism, and does it really matter? Those are the questions being asked. Media Monitoring Africa, involved in organising to discuss, we're joined by the director via Skype, William Bird. William, thank you for being with us. So what can we expect from tomorrow's debate?
Hi, good evening, Francis. Well, tomorrow we're going to expect, I think, some of the most pertinent current issues around media trust and credibility. Obviously, we've seen over the last week or couple of weeks, the Sunday Times in particular being brought into the dock, but I think that there are broader issues around media trust and credibility generally, around how do people know what media they can trust. There's increasing numbers of dodgy news sites. We also will be looking at the public broadcaster. They themselves have had severe dents to their credibility. One of our guests is Patiswa Magopeni, and she'll be looking at what steps the SABC is taking to rebuild their trust and credibility. So it really is, at least tomorrow, a chance for us to have a bit of a deeper introspection. Remember that in as much as there are big challenges with the media, they also fulfill fundamentally a very positive role in our democracy.
You're asking, are we post-truth or post-journalism? What does a post-journalism world look like, William?
Well, I mean, I guess we're just being a little bit provocative, because with anyone who has access to a cell phone, and just about anyone seemingly can be a journalist, what does that mean for the profession of journalism itself? And in fact, a lot of people are arguing that nowadays journalism is even more essential than it was before, precisely because people need to know who they can go to find credible information. And so I think what we're hoping to argue for is that journalism now is as necessary, if not more necessary, than before. Just because we've got access to any kind of information source doesn't mean that we should be accessing any information. We need to source information from people that we know are going to be at least doing background checks, making sure that they're getting their facts straight.
This has all been part of looking back. It started last week, looking back to Black Wednesday, to the shutting down of newspapers in 1977. Do you think as the media, as journalists, we've taken enough time to self-reflect at this time?
So to be honest, not really. South Africa is a whirlwind country. Every week there's a new big story, there's a new breaking story. Sometimes we joke and say it would be nice just to be a little bit boring for a while. And I guess the upside of that means that life is never boring. The downside means that we really haven't spent enough time trying to refashion what does it mean to be media in a new and emerging democracy. What responsibilities does it place on us and on the public broadcaster, on other media houses, for example, and how do we start to deal with those questions? And so I guess part of this is about saying we need to reflect on the diversity. We talked about children this evening, and they're 35% of our population, about 8% of the news. So how do we start to deal with making sure that we give voice to the voiceless?
And you've touched on the fact that there is decreased trust in media houses. Can you foreshadow perhaps some of the solutions that you've been thinking about? How do we build trust?
So I think it's a hard-built thing. The SABC is discovering that you've got to do things like they're doing. You've got to make sure that your editorial policies are open for public scrutiny. You've got to make sure that the SABC is having an inquiry into editorial interference. You've got to make sure that that kind of stuff is public. So part of it is about bringing the audiences into the process of journalism, helping them understand that if we're doing a story on A, we can justify why it's being done on A and how we got there. And so a lot of it is about process. It's making sure that we connect a lot more with audiences because previously we never had to do that kind of thing. And so this is about understanding a new journalism that's more democratic, it's more accountable to the audiences, and shaping that and what that's going to look like in South Africa is a really exciting proposition.
William, I remember reading years ago research suggesting that journalism would become more important as social media rose and it became hard to tell fact from fiction, that journalists would become important in saying this is fake, this is true. But then in the US elections, people were happy to read fake news. We know that. So I'm interested in your question. Do you think quality journalism really counts anymore?
It's not that it just really counts, it's essential, in fact, to democracy. You can imagine that if you believe that chickens should have the vote and that there's a political party that stands for that, that then you're going to start to undermine fundamentally what it means to be realizing our human rights. So I think what we need to be looking at is saying what differentiates the SABC from another person that decides to invent their own broadcaster. What differentiates you is that you're accountable to the members of the public. There's an editorial policies. There's all sorts of standards that you adhere to. Sure, it doesn't mean that you always do, and media get things wrong. But the point is that there's an element of accountability there. And then I think as we approach elections, we know that there are people that are going to deliberately seek to misinform. And how do we deal with that? So we already have plans. We're meeting with the Independent Electoral Commission, the social media platforms, to say how we're going to start to mitigate some of this mis and disinformation that is out there. And that's what the focus is going to be on Thursday.
William, how can people get involved if they want to?
So the easiest way is to just get on one of your social media platforms and look at Media Matters, a Facebook page or the Twitter handle, and you'll find all the details are there. Or have a look at our website, mma.org.za.
That was the Director of Media Monitoring Africa, looking ahead to that event tomorrow. And there are 4 events over 4 days. Media reflecting on its importance, on its failings as well. All right, some time for sport.